Early Final Fantasy is no stranger to having an I win button that works against almost everything locked behind RNG. FF6 has Setzer's Joker's Death, FF7 has Cait Sith's Game Over, FF9 has a slightly more consistent but less broken version in Zidon's Lucky 7, and FF8 has Selphie's The End. Setzer and Cait Sith's slots are relatively simple to comprehend what you're supposed to do. Time your button presses correctly to line up the reels so that you get the instant death pattern. Now, there's an RNG factor where the game literally won't let you line up the final reel most of the time, but it's still a lot simpler than whatever the hell Selphie has going on. Zidon's is also fairly simple, a straightforward 25% chance to deal 7, 77, 777, or 7,777 damage if the final digit of your HP is 7. And if you're really feeling feisty, it's common enough that using it on a few fights in the speedrun is a viable, if not uncommon, strategy. As for Selphie's limit break, well, it's complicated. I suppose in theory it's not so different from the other slots limit breaks, where the value of the game's internal RNG determines whether or not you're able to actually land it, but its mechanics are so much more hidden when compared to the other two and lacks a skill component to it, so you'd be forgiven for expecting it to work completely differently. And the wiki doesn't exactly break it down in a way that lets us understand the patterns. So I dove down the rabbit hole to attempt to fully understand this bizarre limit break and exactly how it works. Also, I could figure out, can we manipulate Selphie's limit break to reliably hit the end? So to start off with, Selphie's limit break, how does it work? And actually, let's take a step back. How do limit breaks in general even work in this game? FF8's limit breaks are kind of a spiritual successor to FF7's, except they're a lot more broken. In FF7, you fill the limit meter by taking damage, rewarding you for playing a bit riskier, and FF8 follows a similar pattern. Except instead of getting one whenever you fill up a meter, it rolls a random chance every time your character's turn comes up. The game has a list of random numbers spanning from 0 to 255 that it follows sequentially every time an RNG call is made. Every time your character's turn comes up, the game does a calculation to determine their limit level, and if their limit level is 5 or greater, then they can use a limit break. Here's the equation the game uses, and let's quickly break down the terms. Status bonus adds up the hidden values for each negative status effect and aura that is on your character. Values are shown here, and multiplies it by 10. More statuses, better odds of a limit break. Death bonus starts at 1600 and adds 200 for each KO'd party member. Each KO'd party member adds roughly a 16% chance to get a limit break. HP mod multiplies the fraction of your current and maximum HP by 2500 and subtracts it from the other terms we mentioned. A lower HP percentage increases our odds of getting a limit break. And finally, all of this is divided by random mod, the one random component of this formula. Random mod generates a number anywhere from 160 to 415, with the lower end of this range giving better odds of a limit break. And if all of this ends up being 5 or greater, then congratulations, you'll hear that special ding and you can select your limit break. But we're not done yet. Each permanent character has 4 different limit breaks available to them, based on another value, crisis level. And get used to this term because you'll be hearing it roughly that many times throughout the video. The crisis level calculation is incredibly simple, you just subtract 4 from the limit level. If you've ever noticed Zell or Irvine having more or less time for the limit breaks, or Squall having a variable amount of slashes, or Quistis randomly going Super Saiyan with her damage ranges, this is all because of crisis levels. Simply put, the higher your crisis level is, up to a maximum of 4, the stronger your limit break is. Now, this isn't true for any temporary characters, and Selphie is complicated. We'll get back to her in a bit. So let's look at a couple scenarios to understand what all of this means in context. If we're at full HP with no status effects or any dead party members, then status bonus is 0, death bonus is 1600, and HP mod is 2500. This gives us a numerator of minus 900, which, if I plug into my spreadsheet, gives us a minus 132% chance of getting a limit break. Now, you might be thinking, Well, that's a load of nonsense. Is that not just 0%? Functionally, yes, but my reason for keeping track of these negative percentages is because every factor effectively affects our odds by a static amount. So these negative percentages serve a purpose by letting us more easily figure out the exact breakpoints we need for certain scenarios. For example, if we just want to get a limit break, every 10% HP our character loses increases our odds by about 19.5%. Another character dying increases it by 15.6%, slow by 11.7%, poison, darkness, silence, petrifying by 23.4%, doom by 35.1%, and aura by a whopping 156.2%. And here's the full table also showing how much these affect the odds for crisis levels 2 through 4 as well. Now, obviously, there are loads of different combinations of status effects and dead characters giving us a million different breakpoints for everything, but I just wanted to look at a few of the simpler, more easily achievable ones. For starters, it's possible to guarantee that our limit will be Crisis Level 1 if we have between 25.7 and 32.2% HP and no status effects or dead characters. This is only ever beneficial for Selphie though, for reasons that I'll get into later. Next up, say we wanted to guarantee a limit break regardless of crisis level. If we have aura and are at 61% HP or less, then every single turn will generate a limit break, with about 39% of those being crisis level 4. And speaking of crisis level 4, they can start appearing when our HP drops below 12.8% normally, 28.8% with 2 dead party members, 92.8% with aura, or full HP with Laura plus any other factor that I listed earlier except for slow. But with Crisis Level 4 being the strongest for most party members, can we guarantee a Crisis Level 4 limit? Yes. Yes we can. The easiest way is to apply Aura and be at 11.2% HP or less, and we can raise this upper HP limit with other status effects or by KOing one or more characters. With Slow, Blind, and Silence inflicted, this jumps up to 41.2%. Curing Slow and KOing 2 party members further increases this to 51.2%. And just for fun, if we inflict all of the statuses and KO both other party members, then 99.2% HP is all we need to guarantee Crisis Level 4. So now that we understand how limit breaks in general work, let's look at how this limit break works. To quickly sum it up, it selects a random spell from the ones available in the game and casts it a random number of times with random targets, keeping the theme of heavy randomness from the franchise's other slot limit breaks and from real-life slot machines. There are 4 spells that are unique to it and can't be cast by any other means: Wall, Full Cure, Rapture, and The End. Full Cure restores the entire party to full HP and removes every status ailment save for Zombie. It unfortunately doesn't revive, though. Wall casts Protect and Shell on the whole party, having incoming physical and magic damage for its duration. Rapture functions identically to Quistis' Limit Break Degenerator and ejects an enemy from the fight assuming they're not immune to it, except it's cast on every enemy present instead of just one. And finally, the ultimate spell, and probably the reason you clicked on this video, The End, which instantly kills every single enemy with the exception of undead enemies such as Garo Garo and Abaddon. When you select slot, the game will pull up a spell and tell you how many times it'll cast and give you the option to cast that spell or select Do Over if you don't like the one that it gave you to try and find a better one. If you have a compulsive need to doom scroll and never get results, you can now uninstall Tinder because FF8 is right here to satisfy your needs. Obviously, your ideal result with this limit break is going to be The End, but depending on the circumstances, you'll probably be happy with Full Cure or Wall, irrelevant multicast of an elemental weakness, high-level offensive magic like Holy, Meteor, Ultima, or Flare, or maybe Aura to give the party more limit breaks. But due to the randomness of getting the spell, along with random quantities and targeting, it's all a huge gamble. Obviously. Hence the name Slot. Now, if you're familiar with FF7 speedrunning, you might know about the old any percent route before a glitch was found that skips all of Disc 1, where the majority of fights starting with Materia Keeper are killed with Cait Sith's Slot's Limit Break. The reels for Cait Sith's slots start off in the same position every fight, so if you learn the correct timing, you can get the right pattern every single time and use Game Over to kill every boss, including the final one. Unfortunately, this isn't the case for Selphie. It doesn't start at the same point in the spell list every time, and the animation for the end is incredibly long, so her limit break isn't a part of the FF8 speedrun. Although I think you can try and scroll for it while Ultimecia is junctioning herself to Griever during the phase transition if you have Selphie, but it only saves a couple of seconds at most, if anything. But that doesn't mean it can't be involved in challenge runs. Recently, or not so recently, depending on how long writing and editing this video takes, my friend and Final Fantasy speedrunner Mutsky, check out his Twitch, was doing a challenge run of Final Fantasy VIII where he would take Selphie to every available fight that wouldn't give her experience, more on that later, and he would only allow himself to kill the enemies in these fights by casting the end off her limit break. I watched a lot of this run and got invested, and eventually became incredibly curious about how her limit break worked, because there weren't really any full breakdowns anywhere on the internet that I could find. What I could tell from watching this playthrough, though, was that a clear pattern was emerging.
Yeah, I'll take you. Hang on a sec.
You might have noticed that the spell sequence leading into the end was always the same. Protect 3, Full Cure 1, Full Cure 1, Fire 2, Drain 3, Water 2, Fire 1, the end. Now, upon seeing this pattern time and time again, I concluded that there must be some gigantic list of spells that the limit would just scroll through, and if you were lucky enough to land a spell list containing the end, then you would just eventually hit this pattern and get it. It wasn't correct, but I thought it was a reasonable assumption to make. In reality, though, it was a bit more complicated. The Battle Mechanics FAQ by Forte GS Omega on GameFAQs has a section talking about how the spells are chosen, but all of this information means nothing without one final piece of the puzzle, the RNG list, which I got from a post also made by Forte in a thread on GameFAQs FF8 board. So we have the RNG, we have the formula for generating the spells. How do we proceed from here? Now, just a disclaimer, I haven't looked directly at the game's code at any point, so internally the game might do something slightly differently than what I'm saying, but the end result is all the same, and I have verified my results in-game. With that out of the way, let's dive into how the spells are generated. First up, the spells are separated into 16 sets as shown on screen. And the first thing the game does is calculate what set to pull from using this formula. The slot level value is calculated first, and we can find it with this formula. Level divided by 10 is pretty straightforward, but since we're dealing with an int data type, everything after the decimal point is discarded, meaning the value increases by 1 every time our level hits a new multiple of 10. Crisis level, we talked about how the game calculates earlier, but one thing to note is that from the moment we select slot, our crisis level is locked in, meaning that there isn't an RNG call to recalculate it every single time. And finally, we generate a random number from 0 through 4, add all these numbers together, and then subtract 1, ultimately generating a number between 0 and 17 depending on Selphie's level. Next up, the game determines slot mod. No funky formula here, just comparing an RNG check to the table shown on screen, and the appropriate value from 0 through 4 is assigned. Slot mod is then multiplied by 12 and added to the slot level to give us spell set value, which is then compared to this table to determine which spell set to pull a spell from. Once we have the spell set, the game generates a number from 0 through 7 to choose what spell we're getting, and finally, one final RNG call is made from 1 to the maximum number of times a spell is allowed to be cast, and this check is still done even if the maximum is 1 to determine the number of casts. So let's recap. For each spell, we need one random number for slot level, one for slot mod, one to choose a spell, and finally, one for the number of casts, totaling 4 RNG calls made for each spell every time we hit do over. You might remember earlier when I said that the RNG list contained each number from 0 through 255 for 256 total entries. And 256 is cleanly divided by 4 to give us 4 different lists of 64 spells for each combination of level divided by 10 and crisis level. Here are the 4 lists with all of the spells available at crisis level 4 at levels 8 and 9. Due to how the formula works, every time our level hits a new multiple of 10, Table at crisis level 1 becomes unavailable. The tables at crisis levels 2 through 4 are all shifted down by 1 crisis level, and we get a new crisis level 4 table. And the tables work. We can see the pattern that I mentioned earlier right here. Protect 3, full cure, fire 2, drain 3, water 2, fire 1, the end. And this is the only time that the end appears in any table below level 80. So for any low level Selphie, we'll have to go through this exact list of spells. Wait, what the hell? No. What's this?
Well, give me another one.
If what I just said was true, then what the hell was that? So the game has one final curveball to throw at us regarding the spell sequencing. Let's look at this clip specifically and see what's going on. You can see the spell list goes Protect 2, Blizzard 2, Protect 1, signifying that we're in this third column here, and we can follow this list down to right here where he gets Cure 2 into Cure 1. But then suddenly we're in this fourth column on the Drain 3 and follow these spells into the end. Now you may have caught what happened, but just in case you didn't, here it is again.
Well, give me another one.
The Tonberry took his turn to walk forward, shifting the RNG index by 1, and changed Mutsky's what I'm going to call offset by 1 and let him hit the end. The RNG list isn't just for us, it's for anything, and it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. On one hand, it ensures that if we find the correct crisis level for our level range, the end will be out there somewhere should an enemy action place us in the correct path. But on the other hand, it means that there's no guarantee that we'll ever find the end depending on enemy actions, even if we do find ourselves with the correct crisis level and offset. And this can make things a bit tricky at times, as there is no hard and fast rule for how enemy actions will interact with the RNG index. Not every attack advances RNG equally. Meteor has 10 hits and has to make an RNG check for each one. Plus, there's an RNG check to decide what attacks some enemies take. Plus, some enemies have turns where they do nothing and the RNG just seemingly advances out of nowhere. And plus, there's hidden RNG checks like, and I know this is from FF7, but it's the first example I could think of. Carry Armor's first turn has a random chance to do a second action. And plus, there are sometimes multiple enemies in a fight, advancing RNG much more frequently. And plus, you get the idea by now. I'm sure you could record how every move advances RNG for every boss, but that's quite a bit more effort than I was willing to invest. But what does this mean in practice? Well, if you're just doom scrolling and hoping for the best, then nothing really. If you have no idea what spell sequence you're even looking for, then assuming you're on the right table, each check is just a 1 in 256 chance to you. Or 4 in 256 chance, but I'll get to that in a minute. If that Tonberry walked forward while this Fire 1 was on screen and you got Thundara 2 instead of the end, that's just as likely as you having been on this wall 1 and it walking forward putting you directly on top of the end. But if you have the table and are actively manipulating your way into the end, I view it as an advantage. Without enemies being able to offset your RNG, then you'd be locked into whatever 64 spell list you were on, adding another layer of RNG into finding the end. But with full knowledge of the list, then if you can find where you are and check your new position after every enemy action, then you only need to navigate yourself to somewhere around here and be ready to mash to the end if you find your offset changed to the right one. Now, this table that I've shown is only available from levels 8 through 39, going from the Crisis Level 4 table at level 8 to the Crisis Level 1 table at level 30. And this is why I noted how you could guarantee that your limit was Crisis Level 1 earlier, as from levels 30 through 39, that's where the end appears. There are 2 other tables that have the end in them, though. Here's the Crisis Level 4 table for level 80, and the end is significantly easier to find on this table. It appears here, 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 and here, in 2 different offsets, making it a lot easier to end up in the right one. And like every other table, it shifts down 1 crisis level when you hit 90, and again at level 100. And the level 100 Crisis Level 4 table introduces 1 final table with a single copy of the end. Earlier, I mentioned that Selphie and Crisis levels were a bit complicated. For other characters, their limits are strictly improved with Crisis level, but with Selphie, it's a lot harder to define what's good. If you just wanted to maximize odds of the end, then Crisis Level 4 is only her best table at levels 8, 9, and 80 through 89. Because the spells are generated based on the same RNG list that's used for everything else, these lists couldn't have been handcrafted. And the method is the same whether you're at level 8 Crisis Level 1 or level 100 Crisis Level 4. So all they could do was tweak the formulas to try and have better spells available for higher Crisis levels. Zell and Irvine get more time to input attacks at higher Crisis levels, Squall gets more hits in, Quistis either does more damage or has more effects. Renoa does more damage at Crisis levels 2 and 4 and has a unique powerful effect at Crisis level 3. Selphie has 11 different level ranges for her limit, meaning there are 14 different spell tables being generated from the same RNG list, and with how they shift down one Crisis level every new level range, they have to be perfectly balanced that every new table was stronger than the previous one, and that's just not feasible without handpicking the spells for each table. So naturally, I decided to look at each of the tables and see whether the tables did indeed get stronger the stronger Selphie got. My methods obviously aren't perfect, as defensive tools are a lot harder to quantify, but I came up with 2 metrics to judge the offensive capabilities of Slot. We already know every appearance of the end, so I tallied up the appearance rate of the next 4 strongest spells that can appear: Holy, Flare, Ultima, and Meteor. And then I also calculated the average spell power of all the spells within a table. Here are the results for the 4 strongest spells in every level range, and if we start at level 0 and go up, then yeah, the appearance rate of these spells does increase with level. But weirdly, they peak from levels 70 through 79, and if we just look at Meteor, the spell with the highest spell power, it actually peaks from level 50 through 59. And looking at level 100, if you combine the Crisis level 3 and 4 tables, then you still have less appearances for each spell than either the Crisis level 1 or 2 table. And this is kind of what I expected. The general appearance rate does significantly increase as you get out of the very low levels, but without handcrafted lists, you have several instances where Crisis level 4 is nowhere near the strongest table. And the average spell power tells a similar but slightly more complicated story. The highest average power does coincide with the highest appearances of Meteor, which makes perfect sense. It has a total spell power of 200, while the next highest, Ultima, only has 80. But the most interesting part of this comparison, and why I'm going to say to take it with such a huge grain of salt, is when we compare the level 0 and level 100 tables. Level 100 actually has a lower average spell power than level 0, but that doesn't quite paint a full picture. The level 100 tables have 5 copies of the end as opposed to the 1 found at level 8, which, as it doesn't do damage, didn't actually contribute to the average spell power. Similarly, Rapture appears 6 times at level 8 versus 20 times at level 100. The low-level table has a lot more copies of stuff like Fire or Fyra that get cast a couple times, keeping the average spell power at a moderate value, whereas level 100 has a lot more spells that do 0 damage, but the times that it does call a damaging spell, it's going to be a lot stronger. I could have kept going and only considered the average of all damaging spells, but I've already gone in too deep. Earlier I asked, can you reliably manipulate your way through the spell list to find the end? And I think I answered that question with my phrasing when talking about the spell lists. Yes, we can. The description will have a link to my Google Sheet that has all of the tables in it. Just select your level and adjust the Crisis level until you find your sequence of spells. Just be aware that some patterns can appear on multiple tables. Obviously, the easiest way to ensure you're on the right table is to put yourself in a situation to guarantee Crisis level 4, but this only works for levels 8, 9, and 80 through 89, and 100. Or get into that narrow HP range to guarantee Crisis level 1 for levels 30 through 39. But for any other level range, you'll have to refresh a few times, preferably with no enemy attacks in the middle, and find that exact spell order somewhere on the list. Once you're on the right Crisis level, the next step is to find your location relative to the end. Each do-over will move you down the current column by 1 row, and then compare your offset to any column with the end. If you're not on the right offset, then wait for an enemy to attack and then check again. I like to hang out around 15 or so rows before the end, and wait for the enemy to take an action, then quickly check my new offset. If I got bumped into the correct offset, then great. Check my current row and what row the end is and do some quick subtraction and mash that many times. If not, let them attack again and repeat. Some enemies will have incredibly long animations like Diablos, and I was able to mash through like 35 spells before his next turn after a demi cast, but figure out what works for you. One other technique is to abuse long summon animations like Eden. RNG won't advance at all during these animations, so if we can find the right crisis level and offset, then as long as we have enough time left in the GF animation to make it there, we'll be guaranteed to find the end. Here are the 3 full tables that contain the end, and what's not on these tables can be as significant as what is. For levels 8 through 39, if you see any of Ultima, Esuna, Tornado, Reflect, Berserk, Death, Stop, Pain, Zombie, Meltdown, Triple, Holy, or Slow, you're on the wrong crisis level and should either try again or search for Aura. For the level 80 through 100 table, Wall, Water, Tornado, Break, Dispel, Shell, Double, Slow, and Stop are indicators that you're on the wrong crisis level. And finally, for the level 100 crisis level 4 table, Arrow, Demi, Dispel, Shell, Slow, Death, Pain, Stop, Berserk, Zombie, Meltdown, Reflect, and Triple are missing. And finally, since I gave you the pattern leading up to the end for the low level table, here are the 6 spells preceding the end for the other 2. This over here isn't an editing error, this copy of the end is just this close to this other one here. Several Silence 3s close together isn't a guarantee that you're close to the end for the level 80 through 100 table, but if you do see Silence 3, keep your eyes peeled. Outside of this part of the table, Holy only appears by itself, so if you see multiple Holies very close together, slow down. And finally, in the level 100 Crisis Level 4 table, this is the only place for double Esuna. Now, you might have noticed that I only ever mentioned finding the end from levels 8 through 39 and 80 through 100, but I skipped levels 40 through 79. Well, here are all of the spell sequences leading up to the end for those level ranges. Now, again, I don't believe this is intentional, it's just a weird quirk of the way spells are generated for Selphie's Limit Break, and there just doesn't happen to be a series of 4 numbers within the one list of RNG used for everything that produces the end anywhere in this level range. So, now you know how to find the end. Great. How do you live long enough to make it happen? Obviously, if enemies are able to take turns and advance the RNG and change their offset, then that means they can do damage to Selphie. And if we're searching for limits, then she's probably not in the safest HP ranges to begin with, so what can we do about this? First of all, having good HP junctions is important. Here's a list of the best spells for HP junctioning, and I wanted to draw attention to Kiraga. It's an incredibly easy spell to get. Siren has L-Mag RF, which can turn Tents or Wizard Stones into Kiragas, so it's really not very difficult to max out our Kiraga stack before the Timber mission for an extra 2200 HP. If you're staying at level 8 or 9 so you don't have to grind to level 80 to have access to it at Crisis level 4, then this is huge since at level 8 Selphie only has 482 HP naturally. Wall isn't an ideal option to cast, but if you suddenly need to heal, then Wall can help make sure that you get your other characters back into a safe position and temporarily reduce damage taken while searching. Though, odds are this Wall will wear off before you find the end. Heroes and Holy Wars are also excellent since you don't have to worry about any damage or statuses whatsoever, but again, they can wear off. And if you need Aura, then you'll have to make sure to cast it before using the Holy War since otherwise Aura will just miss. The ultimate ability to pair with Slot, though, is Defend. Defend is learned by both Brothers and Cactuar, and it completely nullifies any incoming physical damage and halves incoming magic damage until you take your next action. This state stays until we select Cast during Selphie's Limit, meaning we can freely scroll through the list while maintaining our Defend state. Bosses that are incapable of killing except through physical attacks, such as Diablos, become literally impossible to lose since we can just refresh until we get a Crisis Level 4 limit and have infinite time to find that correct offset and the end. Alternatively, if the boss has magic attacks, it also acts as a permanent shell. Editor Scott here. One thing I forgot to recommend in this section is turn down your battle speed. Won't have any effect on how fast you're able to scroll through the spells in her limit break, but enemies will just be attacking you that much slower, so it buys you so much extra time to find the end before you're in any actual danger. Editor Scott here a second time. I don't know how this never occurred to me until I was almost done editing this video, but Renoa is probably the best party member to have for any difficult fights because of her Crisis Level 3 limit break, which I actually did mention earlier in the video, but somehow never connected the dots and realized that we could use this. Invincible Moon applies the same effect as Holy War, granting temporary invincibility to the party and buying you a lot more time to search. It's not super necessary for most fights. Idea 2 and Ultimecia are the two mandatory fights that come to mind where you'd really benefit from having it. I don't know, maybe Mobile Type 8 as well. At least in terms of mandatory bosses, but if you want to try and tackle like Omega or Ultima weapon, then she'll be a really useful asset there as well. Now, all of this sounds great, but you don't start off the game with Defend, Aura, Heroes, Holy Wars, Kiragas, etc., and immediately after Selphie joins the party, you face Elvaret, who is a very dangerous attack in Storm Breath. We have plenty of tools for the endgame and super bosses, but what about my friend's challenge run that I mentioned earlier? Are we able to apply what we've learned in this video to make this challenge run significantly easier? Well, it turns out, yeah, you can. And once you get used to manipulating it, it's not particularly difficult to land against most bosses. Elvaret is tricky because of Storm Breath, since the best easily available HP junction you have access to is 100 Waters, which is only 300 extra HP, but after Elvaret the challenge drops significantly. Siren is drawn from him, and as I mentioned earlier, she lets us make Kiragas very easily and very early, and they're more than enough to carry us through the game until nasty magic attacks start popping up. At the end of Disc 1, Brothers becomes available. I already mentioned they learn Defend, which is the ultimate ability for this playthrough, but they also learn HP plus 20, 40, and 80%. Now, since we need to learn Defend, Carbuncle is going to be the better option for HP 20 and 40, but it can't learn HP plus 80% for the endgame, and that'll be important in a bit. Our tools have set us up so well, and this manipulation is so incredibly powerful that I even set the missile-based self-destruct timer to the minimum of 10 minutes, and managed to find and use the end on this boss twice, and still had 3 minutes left. And for context, I got this on my first try, while it took Mutski about 2 hours to get through this section in his challenge run without any manipulation. Further cranking up our HP, once we get control of Garden, we now have access to the Shumi Village draw point. It costs 5,000 gil to draw from, but if you take the available seed tests, you'll be swimming in gil from running around waiting for the draw point to refresh. Thank goodness the remaster has the triple speed booster. 100 Ultimas gives plus 6,000 HP, which caps out our HP with HP plus 20 and 40% equipped. And Trabia Garden and the Assault on Galbadia Garden have one-time aura draw points, saving us the time of finding it with Selphie's Limit Break. Starting with Idea in Disc 2, a lot of the bosses start to have powerful magic attacks, so Defend no longer buys us infinite time to search our Crisis Level 4 tables for the end. But we still have a few tools to tackle this. Firstly, we don't necessarily need to guarantee a Crisis Level 4 limit. As long as we're still reasonably likely to get it, we can start from a much higher HP value. At 40% HP with Aura, we still have a 65% chance to hit it, and if we inflict Blind and Silence onto Selphie, even 60% HP gives us almost a 70% chance to hit it. And Defend is of course still very useful here since it halves magic damage. And those Kiragas we were using for our HP earlier, well, they're the 4th best junction for Spirit. Reflect and Full Life are technically available, but involve a lot of cards, and Kiraga is more than enough for our needs. And Shiva is great to toss on Selphie starting here since she learns Spirit plus 20 and 40%. And most of the rest of the game is relatively straightforward. Mobile Type 8 lowers your party's HP to 1 and has an AoE magic attack a few turns later, so you either have to find it quickly or manage your HP when that happens. Adele I really thought would fail if you used the end on, since I figured it'd also kill Renoa, but surprisingly it worked. She is still a little bit tricky though due to her magic damage output. At first, I expected Ultimecia to be the hardest mandatory boss fight because of how much damage she actually does, and she definitely still is, but the Sorceress Gauntlet at the start of Disc 4 provides some competition. You need to hit 6 the ends in one fight against enemies with a lot of really strong spells. All of the bosses in Ultimecia's castle are complete pushovers with the obvious exception of Ultimecia herself and Omega Weapon. Ultimecia requires 4 of the ends plus some attacks, though the end also triggers her next dialogue line after she dies, if you really feel so inclined to do it that way. And that just leaves Omega Weapon. He's a bit tricky since if he chooses to never use his physical attack, you're on a really short timer until he uses Megiddo Flame, which would force you to use a hero or Holy War, or fully heal Selphie beforehand. Thankfully for me, I found it very quickly before I would have had to use my hero, so I could save it for Ultimecia. Now, there are obviously a million other things you can do to make this a lot easier on yourself. The Gilgamesh card refines into 10 Holy Wars, Laguna refines into 100 heroes, you can actually go for the better spirit junctions, but my goal was to do this run without going too out of my way for things and just relying on the power of being able to manipulate the end to show up. And I definitely succeeded in that goal. I only had one Holy War and one hero, so I was only able to save 2 characters to drag across the finish line, but we did get there in the end thanks to the knowledge I had acquired from learning how this limit break worked. And that's all I've got. This video ended up being a lot longer than I thought it would be. Hopefully you were able to learn something, and again, I'll have a link to my Google Sheet with the tables down in the description if you wanted to mess around with Selphie's limit break yourself. I really enjoyed diving into the inner workings of this complicated limit break, and this was a fun challenge run to complete. FF8 is famous for its, we'll say, questionable balance, and this one restriction that was placed on the run provided more mid-combat engagement than the game usually does, and considerably more choke points once we started to get deeper into the game.